In the year 60 AD, Rome was at its peak, an empire stretching from the sands of Africa to the forests of Germania. And in the far west, on the misty Isles of Britannia, Rome believed it had crushed resistance. But Rome had underestimated one woman. Her name was Boudica, a queen, a mother, and eventually, a symbol of vengeance that would nearly bring the world's greatest empire to its knees. But before the blood and fire, before the burning cities and slaughtered legions, there is the story of how it all began. And it's a story Rome never wanted to tell. Boudica's early life is a mystery. The Romans didn't write much about her until she became their enemy, and the Celts left no written records. What we do know is that she belonged to the Icenitribe, a people of eastern Britain in what is now Norfolk. The Iceni were proud, fierce. They painted their bodies blue with woad and fought naked to terrify their enemies. But they were also wealthy, known for skilled metalwork, especially gold torques and intricate horse gear, signs of nobility. Some historians suggest Boudica might not have been born royal at all. Perhaps she was chosen, elevated, married into power. We don't know. But we do know this. By the time she entered Rome's story, she had become the wife of Prasutagus, the Iceni king. When the Romans invaded Britain in 43 AD under Emperor Claudius, Prasutagus made a choice. He submitted. Rather than fight Rome, he struck a deal. The Iceni would remain technically independent, as a client kingdom. Rome got its taxes and its loyalty, and Prasutagus got to keep his throne. A fragile peace was bought, at a terrible price, because in this deal Boudica and her people were not equals. They were pawns. And the Romans had a long memory. Descriptions of Boudica from Roman historians are rare and contradictory. The Roman writer Cassius Dio describes her as tall, terrifying, with long red hair flowing to her hips, a harsh voice, and a gaze that could pierce like a dagger. But here's the twist. Was this really Boudica, or Rome's propaganda? To the Romans, female rulers were an oddity. Powerful women often became villains in their histories. Was Boudica really a wild-haired fury, or did Rome shape her image to make her look less like a queen and more like a barbarian witch? What we know is that she was educated in Celtic traditions. She likely spoke in ritual poetry, invoked the gods of war, and led sacrifices. She may have been trained in combat herself. In a world where women could be druids, landowners, and warriors, Boudica was no exception. She was the embodiment of Celtic power, feminine but fierce. For nearly 2 decades, Boudica and Prasutagus lived under Rome's shadow. The Iceni prospered, at least on the surface, but beneath that calm, cracks were forming. Rome's governors grew greedier. Veterans of the Roman army were settled on Iceni lands, often seizing property with little regard for the locals. Taxes grew harsher, and Roman lenders, especially, one by the name of Seneca the Younger, the philosopher and tutor to Nero himself, loaned huge sums to Britain's tribes at crushing interest rates. It was a trap. When Prasutagus died, he thought he had outsmarted Rome. In his will, he left half his kingdom to his daughters and half to Rome, hoping that this compromise would preserve his family's throne. But Rome doesn't share. Rome takes. When the Romans read Prasutagus's will, they laughed. Rome refused to honor it. His lands were seized, his wealth looted. The Iceni nobles were stripped of power, and worst of all, the Romans unleashed brutality on the royal family. Boudica, the queen, was flogged in public. Her daughters, still teenagers, were harassed by Roman soldiers. It wasn't just humiliation. It was a message. Rome owned Britannia. But instead of breaking Boudica, they had unleashed something else entirely. That was the moment the queen became something far greater. Not just a ruler, not just a mother. They had planted the seed of something far darker. This was not just rebellion. This was vengeance. A spark that would stain Rome's legacy in blood. The question is, how does one woman rally a divided land against the most powerful empire in the world? Rome believed they had crushed the Iceni spirit. They were wrong. The brutality against Boudica and her daughters did not cow the tribes. It bound them together. And now, a queen humiliated in chains would rise as a general in war. According to Roman sources, Boudica did not plan her revenge alone. She called upon the Druids, keepers of Celtic religion and prophecy. According to legend, Boudica called her warriors to a sacred grove. One tale tells of Boudica releasing a hare from the folds of her dress before the assembled warriors. The animal bolted, and the Druids declared it a divine sign. The gods favored her rebellion. She stood before her people, a towering figure, and swore. The Druids raised their arms, vengeance not only for her daughters, but for all who suffered under Roman greed. That night, warriors pounded their shields, swearing oaths by the gods of war. And in the middle stood Boudica, not just a queen anymore, but the chosen avenger of a nation. She gathers the tribes. Tribal chieftains sit in a circle, arguing. The Trinovantes chieftain slams his fist on the table, furious.
They took our lands. They took our fathers. What more must they take before we act?
An Iceni warrior speaks.
Then let the queen lead us. Let her carry the banner of war.
All eyes turn to Boudica, who's standing by the door, silent, her hand resting on the hilt of a blade. Her eyes burn with quiet resolve. One by one, the tribes joined her. Old rivalries forgotten, old wounds ignored. Rome had created an enemy it could not comprehend, a united Britain. The first city in their sights was Londinium, modern-day Colchester. Once the capital of the Trinovantes, it had been transformed by Rome into a colony for retired soldiers. To the Britons, it wasn't just a town. It was a symbol of everything Rome had stolen. A shrine to Roman arrogance. At its center stood a massive temple dedicated to the deified Emperor Claudius, funded insultingly with local taxes. For the Britons, this temple wasn't holy. It was a wound, and Boudica was about to cauterize it with fire. The attack came swift and merciless. The townsfolk of Londinium had little defense. No standing garrison, just civilians and a small contingent of soldiers. They fled to the temple, barricading themselves inside, praying Rome would send reinforcements. But Rome was slow to react. For 2 days, the defenders held. On the third, Boudica's warriors stormed the temple. Fire consumed the city. The rebels showed no mercy. Every Roman settler they caught was killed. The streets ran with blood. And when the flames died down, Londinium was ash. Here's the chilling part Rome doesn't tell well in their histories. This wasn't a simple battle. It was an execution. Boudica wasn't waging war like Rome did. She was sending a message. Prisoners weren't merely killed. Some were sacrificed in rituals to the Celtic gods. Archaeologists have found human remains from this period with signs of torture, and some believe these were victims of Boudica's wrath. This wasn't just rebellion. This was vengeance turned into theater. News spread fast. The governor of Britain, Suetonius Paulinus, was far away in Wales, crushing Druids on the Isle of Mona. By the time word reached him, Boudica's rebellion was already spreading like wildfire. Rome scrambled. A small force of the 9th Legion was dispatched to stop her. But it was a disaster. The Legion was ambushed, almost entirely wiped out. Its commander barely escaped with his cavalry. For Rome, this was unthinkable. A woman, a queen, had annihilated a Roman legion. Boudica wasn't done. With Camulodunum destroyed, her army marched on. Their next target, Londinium. Modern-day London. At the time, Londinium was a bustling Roman trade hub, but it had little defense. When news arrived that Boudica's forces were approaching, Suetonius Paulinus faced a brutal choice. Stand and defend the city with too few men, or abandon it to its fate. He chose to abandon it. When Boudica entered Londinium, she gave no quarter. The city was burned to the ground. Survivors were slaughtered. And then came Verulamium, modern-day St. Albans. It too fell. By now, the rebellion had killed tens of thousands. Roman accounts estimate as many as 70,000, 80,000 dead, mostly Roman civilians. But here lies a disturbing twist. Archaeological digs in Colchester and London show evidence of mass graves and ritualistic killings. Victims dismembered, some with skulls displayed. Were these atrocities exaggerated by Roman propaganda to paint Boudica as a savage? Or were they real? Acts of vengeance by a people brutalized for decades? The truth may lie somewhere in between. But one thing is certain. Rome was terrified. The queen had turned rebellion into apocalypse. 3 cities in flames. A legion destroyed. The Roman population of Britain slaughtered. But Rome was not finished. And soon, Boudica would face the full fury of an empire. The question is, could she finish what she had started? Britain was in flames. 3 cities destroyed. Tens of thousands dead. A Roman legion annihilated. For Rome, this wasn't just a rebellion. It was a crisis that threatened to erase their presence in Britain forever. And in the center of the storm, a queen who had become more myth than flesh. The man sent to stop her was Gaius Suetonius Paulinus, the Roman governor. Hardened by wars in Africa and Gaul, Paulinus was ruthless and disciplined. When news of the rebellion reached him, he abandoned his campaign in Wales and raced back across Britain with a single mission: stop Boudica or lose the province.
We cannot save the burned cities, but we can crush her army. We fight on ground of our choosing.
With only around 10,000 men, mostly legionaries and cavalry, Paulinus was badly outnumbered. Boudica's army, by Roman estimates, may have been 100,000 strong. But Paulinus had something the queen did not: strategy. Roman army marching into a narrow valley, wooded hills rising on either side, soldiers planting standards. Somewhere along a Roman road, historians still debate the exact location, Paulinus chose his ground. A narrow gorge with a forest at his back. It meant Boudica's massive force could not surround him. She would have to charge head-on into disciplined Roman lines. It was a gamble, but it was Rome's best chance. Before battle, Boudica gave a speech.
I fight not for my kingdom or my wealth, but for my people, and for the freedom of Britain. The gods are with us, and Rome's arrogance will be their undoing. Let us show them. We are not slaves.
Behind the rebel army, carts were lined up in a ring, filled with families who had come to watch Rome's destruction. It was meant as a victory parade in waiting. Filled with families who had come to watch Rome's destruction. The battle begins, drums pounding. Thousands of Britons charging down the slope, screaming. Romans kneel in formation, shields locked. The rebels rushed forward in a wave of fury. But the Roman lines did not break. They stood, shoulder to shoulder, iron discipline against raw chaos. Then, the Roman pila, heavy javelins, rained down, spears smashing through shields, impaling warriors. The front ranks stumble. As the Britons faltered, Paulinus gave the order. The legions advanced, tight and relentless, forming a wedge that sliced into the mass of rebels. The Britons were caught. Their sheer numbers worked against them, crowding together in the valley. When they tried to retreat, the carts carrying their families blocked the way. Chaos. Women screaming as warriors crash into the wagon circle, horses panicking. Roman cavalry sweep in from the flanks, cutting down all who flee. What had begun as a rebellion's triumph turned into slaughter. By the end, the ground was heaped with bodies. Roman historians claim 80,000 Britons died, compared to only 400 Romans. The numbers may be exaggerated, but the massacre was real. And here lies the greatest mystery of all. What happened to Boudica? Roman accounts offer conflicting stories. Tacitus says she took poison to avoid capture. Cassius Dio claims she fell ill and died soon after the battle. Others whisper she escaped, vanishing into legend. No grave has ever been found, no relic, no certainty. Only silence. Did Boudica die on the field, or did the Queen of Vengeance walk away, her spirit haunting Rome's empire forever? What began as humiliation ended in fire, blood, and myth. Rome would survive, but the memory of a queen who defied an empire would never die. This was not just rebellion. This was a warning carved into history. Even the mightiest empire can tremble at the fury of the wronged. The battlefield fell silent. Rome crushed the rebellion. But the story of Boudica did not end there. It transformed. It slipped from history into myth, and from myth into legend. Roman historians wrote the official record. But can we trust them? Tacitus, the senator historian, claims Boudica died by poison. Cassius Dio, writing later, says illness carried her off. Both stories end the same way. With Rome victorious, the threat extinguished. But think about it. A woman who humiliated Rome, who destroyed cities, who annihilated legions, and not a single body found. Not a grave, not a tomb. Could it be that Rome buried more than her memory? Could it be they buried the truth? Archaeologists have found battle sites, mass graves, burned layers in London and Colchester, scars of her rebellion etched in the earth. But no trace of the queen herself. Some theorize she was cremated, her ashes scattered in secret to keep her spirit free. Others believe she was buried with honor among her people, her resting place deliberately hidden. Centuries passed, and Boudica's ghost resurfaced again and again. In the Middle Ages, she became a cautionary tale, a reminder of God's punishment for rebellion. But in the age of Queen Elizabeth I, she was reborn as a symbol of English defiance against foreign powers. The Victorians embraced her as the Mother of the Nation, erecting the towering statue of her chariot that still stands in London today. Every age has reshaped her. To some, a barbarian witch. To others, a patriot queen. But here's the paradox. Nearly everything we know about Boudica comes from the pens of the very men who despised her, Roman historians. They exaggerated the numbers. They painted her people as savages. They described her not as a ruler, but as a wild fury. So who was she really? A mother seeking justice? A queen hungry for power? Or a symbol carefully distorted by both sides? Rome, to diminish her, and later Britain, to glorify her? 2,000 years later, the trail is cold. The rebellion failed, but the queen's shadow lingers. Her story asks a timeless question. What happens when the powerless are pushed too far? When humiliation and injustice ignite into fire? Rome thought they had silenced her. Instead, Boudica became immortal.